3 a.m. The house is dead silent, and then your baby starts screaming like someone flipped a switch inside their brain. You stumble out of bed, eyes barely open, pick them up, and they're inconsolable. Nothing works. Not rocking, not feeding, not shushing. And the worst part, this isn't the first night. It's the 15th, or the 50th. Every parent who's lived through this has asked the same question. Why 3 a.m.? Why not midnight? Why not 5 a.m.? Why does it always seem to happen in that same brutal window? It turns out 3 a.m. isn't random. There's a biological reason your baby's brain chooses that exact hour to fall apart, and understanding it changes how you respond to it. Let's start with what's actually happening inside your baby's body while they sleep. Because it's not what you think. Adults go through 4 stages of sleep in roughly 90-minute cycles. We drift from light sleep into deep sleep, then into REM, where we dream. And when one cycle ends, we briefly surface toward wakefulness before sliding into the next one. We do this 4 or 5 times a night, and we almost never remember it. Babies don't work like that. A baby's sleep cycle lasts only about 40 to 50 minutes, half that of an adult. And for the first 3 months of life, they enter REM sleep first, not last. Their brains spend about 50% of sleep time in this active, restless REM state, compared to about 20% in adults. So already, your baby is surfacing toward wakefulness twice as often as you are. Every 45 minutes or so, they hit a transition point where they're in the lightest possible sleep. And at that transition point, anything can pull them fully awake. A noise, a temperature shift, a wet diaper, or simply the realization that the conditions around them are different from when they fell asleep. But that still doesn't explain why 3 a.m. is the breaking point. For that, you need to understand 2 hormones that are fighting a war inside your baby's body every single night. The first is melatonin. That's the sleep hormone. When darkness falls, your baby's brain starts producing melatonin, and it peaks somewhere between 7 and 8 p.m. That's why babies tend to fall asleep most easily in the early evening. Melatonin levels stay elevated through the first half of the night, which is why the stretch from bedtime to midnight is usually the deepest, most consolidated sleep your baby gets. The second hormone is cortisol, and cortisol is basically the opposite of melatonin. It's a stimulating hormone, sometimes called nature's caffeine. Its job is to wake you up and get you ready for the day. In adults and babies alike, cortisol starts rising approximately 3 hours before the body's natural wake-up time. So if your baby's circadian rhythm is set for a 6 a.m. wake-up, their body begins producing cortisol around 3 a.m. At the same time, melatonin has been declining since midnight and is now running on fumes. This creates a perfect storm. Right around 3 a.m., your baby enters a sleep cycle transition with almost no melatonin left to pull them back under, and a rising tide of cortisol pushing them toward alertness. They surface into light sleep and, for the first time all night, their brain can't easily slide back down into the next cycle. That's when they cry. And here's the part most parents don't realize. The cry at 3 a.m. is chemically different from the cry at 10 p.m. When a baby wakes in the first half of the night, they're usually easier to settle because melatonin is still working in their favor. The hormonal environment supports sleep, but after 3 a.m., that support is gone. The baby isn't just waking up. They're waking up into a body that's already beginning to prepare for morning, and no amount of rocking can override a hormonal shift. This is why so many parents describe the 3 a.m. wake-up as the hardest one. It's not just because you're more exhausted at that hour, it's because your baby genuinely has a harder time falling back asleep. The biology is working against both of you, but cortisol isn't the only thing going on at 3 a.m. There's a deeper psychological layer to this, and it has to do with how your baby experiences the world when they're alone in the dark. In the 1960s, a psychologist named John Bowlby developed what's now called attachment theory. His central idea was that human infants are born with an instinctive need to maintain physical closeness to their caregivers, and that this need isn't a preference or a habit, it's a survival mechanism hardwired into the brain. When a baby is close to their parent, their nervous system registers safety. Heart rate drops, cortisol decreases, breathing stabilizes. But when a baby perceives separation, especially in a dark, quiet environment where none of their senses can confirm that a caregiver is nearby, their brain interprets it as danger. Sleep, from an evolutionary standpoint, is the ultimate separation. The baby is alone, in the dark, unable to see, hear, or feel their caregiver. And for a brain that evolved in an environment where being left alone meant being vulnerable to predators, that triggers a very specific response. The baby cries, not because they're hungry, not because they're in pain, but because their attachment system has been activated by the separation, and crying is the only tool they have to bring the caregiver back. Research has confirmed this. Studies using the strange situation procedure, a lab-based assessment where babies are briefly separated from their mothers, found that the way babies respond to reunion after separation mirrors the way they behave during nighttime wake-ups. Babies classified as insecure resistant in their attachment style woke more frequently during the night than babies with secure attachment patterns, and their night-waking patterns persisted well into the second year of life. Going to bed for a baby is essentially a repeated separation experiment, every single night. Now add one more layer. Somewhere between 4 and 7 months of age, babies develop something called object permanence. Before this milestone, when you leave the room, your baby doesn't really understand that you still exist. Out of sight literally means out of mind. But once object permanence kicks in, everything changes. Now your baby knows you exist even when they can't see you, and that creates a new problem. They know you're out there, they know you're not here, and they want you back. This is why separation anxiety peaks between 8 and 14 months. And it's why many babies who are sleeping through the night suddenly start waking up screaming again around this age. Their brain has developed a new cognitive ability, and that ability makes nighttime separations feel more intense, not less. So when your 8-month-old wakes up crying at 3 a.m., it's not a regression. It's actually a sign of cognitive growth. Their brain is more sophisticated now. They understand that you exist somewhere in the house, that you're not in the room, and that they can't get to you. That understanding, combined with the cortisol spike and the depleted melatonin, creates a level of distress that feels urgent and real, because to the baby, it is. There's another factor that compounds all of this, and it's one that rarely gets discussed: the mother's anxiety. Research published in the journal Sleep found that a mother's own separation anxiety was significantly linked to her baby's night-waking patterns. Mothers who experienced higher levels of anxiety about being separated from their infants had babies who woke more frequently, and this effect held even after controlling for the baby's temperament. The researchers theorized that anxious mothers may unconsciously reinforce nighttime signaling by responding in ways that communicate their own distress, which the baby picks up on and mirrors. Babies are extraordinary emotional sensors. They can detect tension in the way you hold them, in your breathing rate, in the stiffness of your body. If you approach the 3 a.m. wake-up flooded with your own cortisol and frustration, your baby's nervous system registers that as confirmation that something is wrong. This doesn't mean a parent should ignore their baby or suppress their emotions, but it does mean that the emotional state you bring to that 3 a.m. interaction matters more than you might think. So where does all of this leave us? Is there anything parents can actually do about 3 a.m. wake-ups, or is it just something you survive? The research points to a few things that genuinely help. First, daytime light exposure. Your baby's circadian rhythm is still developing for the first several months of life, and the single strongest signal that helps it calibrate is natural sunlight. Babies who are exposed to bright daylight during their wake windows produce melatonin more efficiently at night. Their bodies learn to distinguish day from night faster, and their nighttime sleep consolidates earlier. Second, managing the cortisol cycle during the day. Overtired babies produce excess cortisol, and that cortisol doesn't just disappear at bedtime, it lingers. Research shows that an overtired baby can take up to 6 times longer to settle to sleep, and they wake more frequently during the night because their baseline cortisol is already elevated before they even close their eyes. The fix isn't keeping your baby awake longer so they'll be more tired. It's the opposite. Getting them to sleep before the cortisol spikes within their natural wake windows keeps the hormonal environment favorable for consolidated sleep. Third, and this one is counterintuitive, making the falling asleep experience match the staying asleep experience. If your baby falls asleep in your arms being rocked, and then wakes up at 3 a.m. in a dark crib with no motion and no warmth, their brain registers a discrepancy. The conditions have changed, and that discrepancy activates alertness, not comfort. This is why sleep researchers consistently find that babies who learn to fall asleep in the same environment they'll wake up in have fewer nighttime disruptions. Not because they don't wake up, Every baby wakes up between cycles, but because when they do wake up, the world around them matches what they expect, and their brain can relax back into the next cycle without signaling for help. And finally, there's the timeline, because this is the part nobody wants to hear, but it's true. Night waking is biologically normal in the first year of life. A baby's circadian rhythm doesn't fully mature until somewhere between 3 and 12 months. Their sleep architecture doesn't resemble an adult's until closer to age 5, and some level of nighttime waking is a feature of infant development, not a bug. Newborns need to wake up to feed. Their stomachs are tiny and they're growing at an extraordinary rate, doubling their birth weight in the first 5 months. Night. Feeds aren't a failure, they're fuel. And beyond hunger, the act of waking and seeking the caregiver serves an attachment function. It confirms the bond. It practices the call and response dynamic that builds trust. It teaches the baby that when they're distressed, someone comes. Research from multiple cultures has found that in societies where babies sleep in close proximity to their parents, nighttime crying is dramatically reduced. Not nighttime waking. They still wake up, but they don't need to scream because the caregiver is already right there. The attachment system never gets fully activated because the perceived separation never occurs. This doesn't mean co-sleeping is the answer for every family. But it does tell us something important about what the 3 a.m. cry actually means. It's not manipulation. It's not a bad habit. It's a baby doing exactly what human babies have done for hundreds of thousands of years, calling out in the dark for the person who keeps them safe. The 3 a.m. Wake up isn't a malfunction. It's a collision of biology and psychology, of cortisol and attachment, of brain development and evolutionary programming, all converging in one moment in the middle of the night. Your baby isn't broken. Their brain is doing exactly what it was built to do. It's just doing it at the worst possible hour. If you want to understand what your baby's sleep patterns reveal about their brain development in the first year, that video's on screen now. Hit subscribe if you want more breakdowns like this. I'll see you in the next one.